Everyone thought Sarah had lost her mind. Days in the desert, digging until her hands bled, whispering to her father's map every night. "The diamonds are there," she insisted. Miner Jake thought so too, until he learned what Sarah was really searching for, because the real treasure on that map wasn't diamonds at all. But this obsession began 2 months ago. Copper Ridge wasn't much to look at. A handful of weathered buildings scattered around played-out mines where desperate men clawed at rock hoping to strike it rich, the kind of place people came to disappear. Sarah McKenna arrived on a dusty Tuesday morning, carrying nothing but a worn leather satchel and determination sharp enough to cut glass. She was 27, with auburn hair that caught the desert sun and green eyes that held secrets deeper than any mine shaft. The townspeople watched her with suspicious curiosity. Women didn't come to Copper Ridge alone, not unless they were running from something. Jake Morrison noticed her first. He was 35, a loner who'd been working the copper mines for 8 years, ever since he'd lost everything in a poker game back in Denver. He kept to himself, spoke little, and trusted even less. But something about Sarah caught his attention. Maybe it was the way she studied the landscape like she was reading a book, or how she asked the general store owner about old mining claims with the intensity of a preacher discussing salvation. "Looking for something specific, miss?" Jake finally asked one evening as Sarah spread papers across a table in the only saloon. Sarah looked up, startled. In the lamplight, Jake could see the map she'd been studying, hand-drawn, faded, covered in her father's careful markings. "Diamond deposits," she said simply. "My father mapped them before he died." Jake had seen plenty of treasure maps, usually drawn by drunk prospectors or con men looking to sell hope to the desperate. This one looked different. "Your father was a geologist?" "A dreamer," Sarah replied, but there was pain in her voice. "But a dreamer who spent 20 years studying these mountains." Within a week, Sarah had purchased basic mining equipment and staked a claim in the most remote part of the desert. Every morning before dawn, she'd pack water and dried meat and disappear into the wasteland. Jake watched from a distance as she dug, and dug, and dug. The townspeople started talking. "Poor girl's lost her mind," said Martha, the saloon owner. "Chasing fairy tales," added old Pete, shaking his gray head. "Ain't no diamonds in these parts." But Sarah didn't stop. If anything, she worked harder. Her hands became raw, her skin burned bronze, her green eyes took on the wild gleam of someone who'd stared too long into empty holes. Jake found himself riding out to check on her. Not to interfere, just to make sure she was still breathing. One afternoon, he found her collapsed beside her latest dig, unconscious from heat exhaustion. He carried her back to town, laid her on the bed in the boarding house, and waited for her to wake up. When she did, the first words out of her mouth were, "The map says 15 feet. I've only gone 12. "Sarah," Jake said gently, "maybe your father was wrong." Her eyes flashed. He wasn't wrong. He was never wrong about stones. But Jake saw something else in her expression, a flicker of doubt she was fighting hard to suppress. Weeks passed. Sarah's digs grew deeper but yielded nothing, not even a glimmer of the diamonds her father had promised. Jake started bringing her water and food, not because she asked, she never would, but because someone had to. "Why do you care?" she asked one day, looking up from yet another empty hole. Jake considered the question. "Maybe because I know what it's like to dig for something that ain't there." "You've looked for diamonds too?" But I've looked for enough things that turned out to be mirages." Sarah went back to digging, but her movements were slower now, less certain. That night, Jake found her sitting alone under the stars, the map spread on her lap. She was crying. "It's been 6 weeks. she whispered. 6 weeks and I haven't found a single stone. Jake sat down beside her, careful not to crowd her grief. What if he lied to me? Sarah continued. What if the map is just wishful thinking? Why would your father lie? Sarah's voice broke. Because he was dying. Because he wanted to give me something to hope for. Because he knew I'd have nothing left when he was gone. The pieces clicked together in Jake's mind. This wasn't about diamonds. This was about a daughter desperate to keep her father's memory alive. Sarah, Jake said softly, what if the map is real, but you're looking in the wrong place? She looked at him through tear-blurred eyes. What do you mean? Jake pointed to a cluster of stars overhead. See that constellation? Miners call it the Diamond Cross. Your father would have known that. Sarah studied the stars, then looked back at her map. The markings, they're not just geographic coordinates, are they? Look closer. By moonlight, Sarah traced her finger over her father's careful notations. Suddenly, she gasped. The symbols, they're star positions. He was marking celestial navigation points. And if you follow those stars... Sarah's eyes widened as understanding dawned. They lead back toward town, toward ... the old mine, the one everyone says is played out. The next morning, Sarah and Jake rode to the abandoned copper mine, where Jake had worked for years. Armed with Sarah's map and Jake's knowledge of the tunnels, they descended into the darkness. 3 hours later, they emerged with a small leather pouch. Inside weren't diamonds. They were copper nuggets, but copper so pure and beautiful, they gleamed like green jewels in the sunlight. Your father wasn't mapping diamonds, Jake realized. He was mapping the richest copper deposits in the territory. Sarah stared at the nuggets, then began to laugh. He gave me exactly what he promised, a treasure that would make me rich. But as she looked at Jake, something else occurred to her. I've been digging alone for 2 months. Why did you help me? Jake met her eyes. Because watching someone search for something precious reminded me that I'd stopped looking for anything at all. 6 months later, the McKenna Morrison Copper Company was the most successful mining operation in 3 counties. Sarah's father's maps had led them to deposits that would last decades. But more importantly, Sarah had found something her father never could have mapped. Someone who believed in her search, even when she'd stopped believing in it herself. Jake had found something too. After years of working alone, he'd discovered that the best treasures aren't buried in the ground. They're standing right beside you, willing to dig deeper when hope runs dry. One evening, as they watched the sunset paint the desert copper-colored, Sarah took Jake's hand. Do you think my father knew? She asked. Knew what? That the real treasure wasn't what I'd find, but who I'd find it with. Jake smiled. Your father was a smart man. I think he knew exactly what he was doing. Sarah looked at the map one last time, then folded it carefully and put it away. Some treasures, she'd learned, were worth searching for. Others were worth waiting to be found. And the best treasures of all were the ones that found you when you weren't looking. If this story reminded you that sometimes what we're searching for isn't what we actually need to find, then you understand the true spirit of the frontier. Here at Western Romance Stories, we believe the greatest adventures begin not with a destination, but with someone brave enough to search alongside you. Subscribe for more tales of unexpected discoveries, hidden treasures, and the kind of love that's worth more than all the diamonds in the earth. Because sometimes the best map to follow is the one that leads to another person's heart.